What's going on, guys? So this is part two of me reacting to Billy Carson, his accusations against God, and some things that he sees in the Bible that feels are contradictory. And so I am going to respond to one of the points that he made. I believe that this point is worth taking some time on. So I'm going to dedicate this entire video to this one point that Billy Carson made. I do believe that this is a big deal for a lot of people. A lot of people, when they feel that the Bible is condoning this, this is kind of a deal breaker for a lot of people. But I'm here today to prove that the Bible does not condone of this particular act and to show you why Billy Carson and many who interpret the Bible this way are wrong in a way that you can actually understand it yourself and see what I'm talking about. So, what is this thing that Billy Carson is accusing God of in the Bible? Well, one, he's talking about how God told Israel to go to war against the surrounding nations or groups of people and basically take their land and defeat them in war. And in this, Billy Carson is finding God guilty of condoning rape, okay? Condoning rape as well as murder. But I really want to focus on rape. I'm going to spend a little bit of time giving context for why God would command war. I'm going to give a little context for this idea that God is condoning murder. But then I'm really going to tackle the idea that God condones rape. Okay, so let's get right into it, y'all. So, first of all, Billy Carson was in Deuteronomy, okay, chapter 20, and he was mainly focusing on verses 10 through, I believe, um 14, 10 through 14, and he stopped there, okay, and he said, based on these four verses, that God was approving of rape. All right. So let's go ahead and talk about the war itself first. So let me give you guys this context. According to the Bible, God is a holy God who hates sin and a just God. And how God responds to sin is through judgment and wrath because he is holy and a just judge. Okay? Now, all you have to do is think about the justice system wherever you live, the job of the justice system, right? The job of the legal system. Their job is to punish evil. That's their job. Now, they may not be doing that job very well, right? There may be some corruption, but their job is to punish evil. Okay? Their job is to come down on evil with some type of consequence, whether it be light or severe. Okay? All the way from a slap on the wrist to the death penalty, the electric chair. Okay? And most of us agree that criminals should be punished. Most of us agree with that. If you don't agree with that, that says that something is morally wrong with you. So most of us agree with that. All right. Most of us agree that a murderer deserves the death penalty, a life for a life. Right. Most of us can agree with that. Most of us would not protest if a murderer receives the death penalty. And if you do protest, then that kind of speaks to something morally off about you. Now, you can have other reasons for wanting to spare a murderer, but for the most part, right, a murderer deserves the death penalty. Okay, they've taken a life, they deserve for their life to be taken. Now, we think about the legal system, the justice system, okay, and we can agree that these things are right and good and true. Now, let's think about God. If God is the epitome of justice, if God is the epitome of good, then God must do something about evil. Okay? He must do something about evil. And God also he gets to define what is evil in his eyes and what is good in his eyes. So here's the context. let's name a few people groups that God commanded Israel to go and destroy. Okay? Deuteronomy chapter 20, and we're going to read verse 17. God says, "But you shall devote them to complete destruction. The Hittites and the Amorites, the Canaanites and the Perizzites, the Hivites and the Jebusites, as the Lord your God has commanded." Now, here's the reason: that they may not teach you to do according to all their abominable practices that they have done for their gods, and so you sin against the Lord your God. Now, you might say, oh my gosh, God devoted these people groups to destruction, right? Annihilation, because he didn't want Israel to learn their ways. It's not that simple, you guys. Now, listen to what God said: that they may not teach you to do according to all their abominable practices. The word abominable means utterly disgusting. That's what God is saying when he uses the word abominable, utterly disgusting. Now, I'm going to share with you guys some of these practices that these people groups were doing back then. They worshiped other gods, Baal, okay, and other gods they worshiped. And what they did on behalf of these other gods, who were false gods of their imagination, were utterly evil things. You can look this up. These people groups would sacrifice their children on a burning altar, literally barbecuing newborn infants on a burning altar as a sacrifice to a false pagan god named Baal. Okay? They also would participate in orgies on the tops of mountains and hills and underneath trees as a form of sexual sacrifice to these gods. They would eat human flesh. They would drink human blood. They would do despicable things that, if done today, would be all over the news and go viral as this horrible thing that has taken place. Everybody would be talking about it. This was a regular practice for these people groups that worshiped these false gods. These people were wicked, ruthless, barbaric savages. And not only were they like this within the confines of the place where they lived, but they would also go and ravish other people and other lands and bring their ways into other territories, so that this wickedness was spreading throughout the land. And so God, having his own people group that he handpicked out of the world, Israel, and using Israel as his hammer of justice and judgment against the wicked, would tell Israel to go and wage war against these evil people groups. And God, in his mercy, he would spare the women and the children, because he would primarily hold the men accountable for such great sin, even though the women may have well participated in these sins, and the children may not have been innocent in themselves. But for the most part, God sees children as innocent ones. Up to a certain age, the children were not held accountable by God. As a result, God would spare the women and the children and wipe out the men of these people groups that were doing these horrible things. Okay? So God was saving newborn infants from being sacrificed on an altar. God was saving women um, from being violated and things of that nature, because of these practices they had, these orgies and things. They were not civilized in any way. Women were not safe in these people groups at all. So God was saving them out of their situation and also showing them mercy because they too had probably practiced some of these abominable things. So this is the context for God telling Israel to go to war. Billy Carson said that God told them to go to war just simply so they could have more land and more territory. And they were waging war against people they didn't even know. Now, this may or may not have been true that they didn't know these people personally, but they knew about these people for sure. And even if they didn't know about these people, God knew about these people and all the things I just told you, God had seen with his own eyes. And now God has decided to carry out righteous, holy judgment against these evil people and to do that. And so this is a false accusation on the part of Billy Carson, not knowing the context, not knowing the character of God, and probably himself not seeing these abominable acts as worthy of annihilation because somewhere in himself he doesn't see sin for what it is, but God sees sin for what it is. That's the problem with us. We can look at these false God worshiping practices and these evil things and still say these people don't deserve to be wiped out. Now, as humans, we're not able to make that call because we're not God. But how are we to accuse God of wrong for wiping out such evil people who did such evil things? If we find fault with God, that shows our own sinfulness and wickedness. So, God is justified in this command to wage war against certain people groups and even to annihilate them from the face of the earth. So I want to give you that context first, because people really can't see God's justice in this, but it's so clear. Now, let's talk about the murder part, saying that God is condoning murder. Murder is not justice. The what I just described to you is not murder, it's justice. Murder is when somebody's life is taken wrongfully. But according to what I just told you, God is justified in taking the lives of these people. Okay? Just like we would say a murderer should get the death penalty. These people were murderers, rapists, however, whatever else you want to put on them. They were doing everything. They were lawless. Okay? So it's not murder. Now let's talk about the rape piece. Okay, let's talk about the rape piece. Billy Carson read verse 10 through 14 of Deuteronomy chapter 20. And he jumped to the assumption that this was condoning the rape of women. So I'm going to read it to you and see what assumption you jump to. Okay? And then I'm going to clarify what the text says. All right? So, verse 10. When you draw near to a city to fight against it, offer terms of peace to it. And if it responds to you peaceably and it opens to you, then all the people who are found in it shall do forced labor for you and shall serve you. First, let's look at the mercy of God. I just told you God commanded these people to be wiped from the face of the earth. However, before he gave them that fate, he told Israel to first offer them terms of peace. And these terms will require them to stop their sinful ways, to give up their abominable practices, and to become servants of God and God's people, to be brought into God's kingdom and submit to his ways and his law, right? Forced labor, this is a punishment and a discipline, but also a merciful punishment and a merciful discipline when taking into account the things they had done. So they're not getting completely off the hook here. So when you say, oh my God, forced labor, God is terrible. He's condoning slavery. It's not slavery in that sense. It is forced labor and it's a punishment for the wickedness. Okay? Now the forced labor does not mean that they're going to be mistreated, hurt in any way, beat, whipped, or anything like that. It simply means that these are the terms that they must oblige to, or God will carry out his full wrath on them because of their wickedness. This is what they have to do. All right. Now let's continue to go. Now, he says, but if it makes no peace with you, but makes war against you, then you shall besiege it. And when the Lord your God gives it into your hand, you shall put all its males to the sword, but the women and the little ones, the livestock and everything else in the city, and all its spoil you shall take as plunder for yourselves, and you shall enjoy the spoil of your enemies, which the Lord your God has given you. This part right here is where Billy Carson said God was condoning rape, because the text says that the women and the little ones and the livestock you shall take as plunder for yourselves and enjoy all the spoil that God has given you. So in Billy Carson's mind, the women are being considered as spoil here. And if you are going to enjoy a woman as spoil, Billy Carson's is assuming that that's automatically meaning that you get to take these women sexually as an object of spoil to enjoy because you've won the war, and that somehow God is condoning rape. Now, I can see why somebody would jump to this assumption because of the way the text reads. But in the very same book, Deuteronomy, in the very next chapter, God gives more specific rules about the women that are being taken from the land. Okay, and I want to provide clarity on what God means, and then some additional things to give more clarity that God is not condoning rape, you guys. All right, you have to keep reading. So, Billy Carson did not take the time to read further, and if he did not read these things to give that clarity. All right, so let's look at Deuteronomy chapter 21, very next chapter, verse 10 through 14. All right, this is titled Marrying Female Captives. So after Israel has uh, conquered this wicked people, right, and the women and children and livestock have been spared, but have been taken in captive to the nation of Israel to become a part of the nation of Israel, right, and as plunder and spoil, right. This is what God says about the female captives. Okay? Now, bear with me here. He says, when you go out to war against your enemies, and the Lord your God gives them into your hand, and you take them captive, and you see among the captives a beautiful woman, and you desire to take her to be your wife, and you bring her home to your house, she shall shave her head and clip her nails, and she shall take off the clothes in which she was captured, and shall remain in your house, and lament her father and mother for a full month. After that you may go into her and be her husband, and she shall be your wife. But if you no longer delight in her after the month, you shall let her go where she wants, but you shall not sell her for money, nor shall you treat her as a slave, since you have humiliated her. All right. Now, let's talk about it. Okay. So, first of all, God says, if you see a beautiful woman, so not multiple women, but a beautiful woman, right? This conforms with God's law that it's one husband, one wife, and a union of faithfulness and love together. Okay. Then he says, and you desire to take her to be your wife. When God says desire to take her to be your wife, we have to understand when God says wife, God is talking about something deep, something special, something sacred. When we talk about wife and our own sinfulness, we just thinking somebody that we can get it from and they can cook for us. But God is not saying wife in that way. He said when you desire to take her to be your wife, that's God saying you desire to commit yourself to her, take care of her, and love her. Now let's keep in mind this woman may have not had a husband in the land of the Canaanites or wherever she was. She may not have been engaged. She may have been a virgin, or she just may have been single. And so if the land and everything has been taken, and her line of support or whatever she had, if she had that, is taken away as a result of the war, God is saying to the man, if you want to take her in to take care of her and support her and love her and commit to her, you can do so, but there are some conditions first. Okay? So let's consider that. All right? Now, this is God's provision for the woman, but also God's gift to the man. In the midst of something as muddy as a war, God has given provision to the wife or the woman and a gift to the man in the woman, right? God sees the woman as a gift, as a precious thing, a precious gift for a man if if there be mutual consent. So check this out here. All right. So it says here, bring her home to your house. She shall shave her head and pare her nails, and she shall take off the clothes in which she was captured, and shall remain in your house. Okay, so a couple things the woman has to do. She has to shave her head. She has to clip her nails. Okay, this is a sign of humiliation or humbleness. This is a discipline from the Lord because a woman has engaged in these wicked, abominable practices, and that she has to convert over to God's way and and she's gonna join God's people. Then she has to go through this process of basically renouncing her old ways, and this is a process of humiliation. Okay, a process of humiliation. It would be like, let's say, Alcoholics Anonymous, for example. Let's just use that as an example. Okay, a person who is an alcoholic, right, is told that, okay, once you get rehab and all of these things, you still have to identify as a recovering alcoholic, right? And you can't, you shouldn't go to a bar, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that, right? If you're really repenting about your behavior and you're really turning away from it, you have to go through this process. The process is makes you humble. It's embarrassing, right? But if you really want to turn from it, then you have to go through this process. Well, it's kind of the same thing here. Okay, the woman is being required to go through a process of humiliation to turn from the wickedness and to turn towards God's ways. All right. Now, it says she shall take off the clothes in which she was captured and remain in your house. Now, this part right here is she's not taking off her clothes just to be naked the whole time. She's taking off her clothes to put on new clothes. All right, so she's basically it's a symbolic in a sense that she's leaving the old way and coming into the new way. All right, and so she's going to put on new clothes. So the man is going to provide her with clothing. It's similar to in the Garden of Eden when Adam and Eve sinned and they were found naked. God took the skin of a lamb and clothed them with it and covered their sin. And so, in the same way, the woman is going to do that as well. It's symbolic. Okay. Now, let's talk about this. She shall lament her mother and father for a full month. So, during the war, there may have been losses or casualties, right? The father may have been gone, okay? But also, because of marriage, it says that a man shall leave his mother and father and cleave to his wife. Well, the same applies to the wife. So that is also talking about that the woman is going to make a commitment to her husband, and the husband is going to make a commitment to his wife. They are going to leave their mother and father and cleave to one another. And so she'll have a month to prepare to make that commitment. So she shall lament her mother and father for a full month. Then it says, after that, you may go into her and be her husband. So God is saying, look, you cannot have sex with this woman once you take her in to be your wife. You cannot have sex with these captives. Okay, only excuse me, only a woman that you decide to commit yourself to take in to be your wife, to care for her and to love her, can you go into after a month, okay, of allowing her to prepare for such a thing. All right. Now it says, but if you no longer delight in her, you shall let her go where she wants. Right. So let's consider that. If you no longer delight in her. Now, this is not God saying that you can just throw her away, but this is God saying that if you no longer delight in her, take pleasure in her, have these desires for her and this love for her, then let her go free. Okay. Because if you have a woman captive, or a captive woman in your home, okay, and she is pretty much kind of helpless in this situation, right? And you're not going to commit to caring for her and loving her because you don't delight in her. You just let her go free versus letting her stay there and you mistreating her, treating her bad, being violent, whatever it might be, treating her like a slave. All right. So God says, let her go free. Then God says, but you shall not sell her for money, nor shall you treat her as a slave. So God obviously does not want the woman to be treated like a slave. Okay, he says it explicitly here. So no matter how we feel like it's sounding, right, we see explicitly that God doesn't want the woman to be treated any less than. All right, you shall not treat her as a slave. Okay, since you have humiliated her. All right. So on one hand, she has been humbled by God, but on the other hand, if the man takes her in to be his wife, lets her live with him, but then he decides that he doesn't want her, he doesn't delight in her, and he lets her go free, he has, in a sense, humiliated the woman. He has done the woman wrong because he has betrothed her, but then he changed his mind. So he has humiliated the woman, and God says, no, let her go free. Do not treat her as a slave. You've already humiliated her. All right. So God does consider that. So in the very next chapter, after chapter 20, where Billy Carson makes these accusations, we see that God has specific rules for the woman who was a captive, but now who has been taken in to be a man's wife. Okay, taken into his home and taken under his care. And we see that God does not want the woman to be treated badly. That he does not condone for the man to have sexual relations with her until a month has passed, and that he still delights in her, and that she has had time to prepare for the commitment and is ready to be his wife. So we see that rape is not condoned here. All right, and we see that if the man does not delight in her, and if there's not going to be that commitment and that love and that care, then God says to let her go free. Okay, let her go free. She can go where she wants. All right. So now you say, okay, well, what about when she goes free? What is she gonna do? Did God consider that? Well, yeah, I will discuss that here in just a minute. So let's keep moving forward. All right, let's keep moving forward. Genesis chapter 2, verse 24. I said it before. A man shall leave mother and father and cleave to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This is God's law for marriage. So when God was talking about the man taking a wife, God meant this, right? Cleaving to her, and the two shall become one flesh. This is a unity, a oneness, right? That she becomes one with you, and you become one with her physically and spiritually. Okay, this is not a slavery. This is not the masculine view of marriage. Okay, this is a beautiful love story thing going on here. That when a man takes a woman, it's supposed to be special. All right, this is what God is talking about whenever He talks about a man having a wife or taking a wife. Okay, so God is not simply saying just take her for your own pleasure, right? You want her, you a man, you can have any woman you want. Men rule the world. That's not what God is saying. God is saying that if you're gonna take a wife, you gotta love her like a valuable, precious treasure and y'all have to become one flesh, and y'all have to cleave to each other, hang on to each other, hold on to each other tight, right? So this is what God means. All right. So that's context for that part. Now, Leviticus 19, 18, chapter 19, verse 18. I'm sorry. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Right. Your neighbor in the Old Testament is anybody that is in your vicinity. Basically, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Anybody that is under the same God as you. Right. You shall love them as yourself. Right, your fellow human being. You shall love them as yourself, right? Now, this also applies to a wife, right? You should love them. You should love your neighbor as yourself. Well, your wife is more than a neighbor, okay? So when God is talking about marriage, once again, He is expecting the man to love the woman as himself. This is a deep love that God is expecting here. This is not slavery. This is not rape. This is not the masculine view of marriage. This is deep, all right? Now, let's continue here. Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 23 through 29. These are the laws against rape in Deuteronomy. So, in the same book, two chapters later, so Carson was in chapter 20. I defended with chapter 21. And now in chapter 22, we have the laws against rape. All right. So, let me go ahead and read these to you. These laws are actually against rape and adultery. Verse 23. If there is a betrothed virgin and a man meets her in the city and lies with her, then you shall bring them both out to the gate of that city, and you shall stone them to death with stones. The young woman, because she did not cry for help, though she was in the city, and the man, because he violated his neighbor's wife. So you shall purge the evil from your midst. Verse 23 is talking about adultery. Okay? The betrothed virgin is engaged to another man. But it says, if a man meets her in the city and lies with her, you shall bring them both out and stone them both, because she did not cry for help. This is talking about consensual adultery. The man and the woman has committed adultery willfully. Okay, the woman was not raped in this scenario here. This is a willful. She did not cry out for help, and it just says he meets her in the city and lies with her. Now, verse 25 talks about a man seizing a woman and lying with her. This is rape. So in verse 23, when it just says he lies with her, this is consensual sex. Okay? So, verse 25. So, before I go there, I'm sorry. Let's go back to verse 24. So, God says the reason why is because this man has violated his neighbor's wife, even though the wife agreed to it, but she was still violated because this was not her betrothed. Okay? This is a violation of a covenant, okay, and a violation against this man's wife. So God hates that, right? God values the covenant, he values marriage, he values the man, and he values the woman, okay? But because they both agreed to the sin, and God is a holy, just, righteous, perfectly good judge, God says, you shall kill them both. You shall purge the evil from your midst. This is justice at its most strict, because God is perfectly just. This is not evil or wrong. This is the epitome of good. God punishing sin with the most severe punishment, because in his eyes, this sin is egregious. He is not okay with it. Okay? We might be okay with adultery, but that's our problem. We are morally jacked up. But God, when it comes to adultery, says it's a penalty that's worth death. And that's, we should feel that strongly about adultery, in terms of not seeing it for what it is, having strong animosity towards such a sin and avoiding it at all costs. But instead, we actually say it's not that bad. Some of us have done it and we're okay with it, but it shouldn't be. That shouldn't be the case, y'all. It shouldn't be the case. We are corrupted. Okay? Now, listen. Verse 25. But if in the open country a man meets a young woman who is betrothed, and the man seizes her and lies with her, then only the man who lay with her shall die. See? But you shall do nothing to the young woman. She has committed no offense punishable by death. For this case is like that of a man attacking and murdering his neighbor, because he met her in the open country, and though the betrothed young woman cried for help, see, she was raped, there was no one to rescue her. So God compares rape to murder. God does not condone rape. God compares rape to murder. He says it's like attacking and murdering your neighbor. And he says the punishment for a man raping a woman is that the man shall be killed. That's the worst possible punishment you can give for a crime. This proves that God does not condone rape. It does not get a slap on the wrist. The man's life is ended on behalf of the woman whom he has violated. Let me show you God's perfect justice as compared to ours. I looked up what is the penalty for sexual assault. It says that it's a second-degree felony. Anyone convicted of sexual assault may receive a jail sentence from between 2 and 20 years. Rape doesn't even get the death penalty in America. We have a lesser view of rape than God. Our legal system sees rape as less of an evil than God sees it. 2 to 20 years in jail. God says, no, this person shall die. That's how strongly God feels about a woman being violated. God feels more strongly about a woman being violated than we do. Yet we want to accuse God of condoning rape. These things are not true. All right? Let's read further. If a man, verse 28, if a man meets a virgin who is not betrothed and seizes her and lies with her, and they are found, then the man who lay with her shall give to the father of the young woman 50 shekels of silver, and she shall be his wife because he has violated her. He may not divorce her all his days. So the man has seized a woman and lied with her, but she was not engaged. She was a virgin and she was single. Okay, he has seized her and lied with her. Here's what the man has to do. He has to pay a debt to her father because of what he has done. He has to take her to be his wife, okay, which means he has to now provide for her, protect her, and care for her, and he may not divorce her all his days. He may not divorce her all his days. This means that this man has to care for this woman for the rest of his life. He can never go find another woman. He has to make this woman a lifelong commitment, and he has to atone for the sin that he has committed to the father and to the woman. This is how serious God takes these things, so that the woman is not left without provision and protection. That she is not this man is not simply getting away with what he has done, but now he has to spend the rest of his life atoning for it. All right. And if this man does choose to divorce her and try to find another, well, he has now committed adultery, and we just read that adultery is punishable by death. So it's either commit yourself to this woman, care for her for the rest of your life, atone for what you've done to her, or die. This is God's stipulation about violating a virgin who is not engaged. Okay? So God takes these things very, very seriously. All right? Very seriously. God does not condone rape in any way. Okay? Let's talk about Hagar. Hagar was cared for by God. Hagar is mentioned in Genesis chapter 16 and in Genesis chapter 21. So God promised Abraham that he was going to give him a son, and his wife was Sarah, and they doubted God's promise, and Sarah told him to sleep with Hagar, who was their servant or their maid, basically. She was an Egyptian. She was not a Hebrew. She was an Egyptian, and they had taken her in as a servant, and she was serving them. Okay. And Sarah said, sleep with Hagar and see if she can get pregnant, and then you can have a son that way, and maybe that's how God's promise will be fulfilled. But that was not God. That was not what God said. Okay, they sinned against God in this case. So, anyways, Hagar got pregnant. Sarah ended up hating Hagar because she got pregnant with her husband's child when she couldn't have a child. Okay, she ended up mistreating her, and Hagar basically ran away because she was scared for her life. So God showed up to Hagar and told her, yes, I know you've been treated bad. I know you've been treated wrong, but I'm going to protect you, and I'm going to bless your son. He's going to be rich. He's going to have his own nation. He'll be a king in his own land for a long time, and from generation to generation, his seed will be blessed, and you will be blessed because you're his mom. So God promised to take care of Hagar, who was being mistreated because of her situation. So God cares about women, you guys. God does not condone rape. So let's talk about laws about widows. So let's go back to the whole idea that, right, these women have been taken as captives. Okay, they have been taken as captives, and they are essentially widows, right? If you had a husband who was a pagan and was worshiping these false gods, doing this terrible stuff, your husband was killed. So now you're a widow. All right. So here's God's laws about the woman who has been left without a man to care for her. All right. He says in Exodus chapter 22, verse 22 to 24, he says, you shall not mistreat any widow or fatherless child. So he cares about the children too. You shall not mistreat any widow. You shall not mistreat any widow, regardless of where they from, regardless of the situation. You shall not mistreat any widow. Listen to God's vindication and care for a woman. Okay? He says, if you do mistreat them and they cry out to me, I will surely hear their cry, and my wrath will burn, and I will kill you with the sword, and your wives shall become widows, and your children shall become fatherless. If you mistreat a widow, if you mistreat one of these captives, I will hear their cry, and my wrath will burn, and I will kill you. Is rape mistreating a widow? Yeah. God does not condone rape. He hates it. He will kill you. Okay? This is God's punishment. All right? So, I believe that I've proved this point. If nothing else you get out of this, just know that Billy Carson's accusation that God is sending people to war for no reason or for evil reasons, murdering folks without a cause, innocent people, murdering innocent people just to steal their land. This is not true. And that God is telling the men of Israel that they can have any woman they want and just violate her and treat her however they want and rape. It's not true. I just proved it to you. And I use nothing but Old Testament. Because somebody make the argument, well, because in the New Testament it gets even more clear. Paul says about the husband and the wife, you shall love your wife as Christ loved the church and gave up his life for her. Literally, you shall sacrifice your entire life for your wife. You shall give her your entire life. You shall protect her and teach her and care for her, and you shall treat her as your own body. God expects for a man to treat a woman as a precious treasure with great care and great love because God sees the woman as a precious treasure. He loves her greatly and cares for her greatly and will kill if she is mistreated. All women out there who have been mistreated, just know that God will avenge you. Whether he does it now or he does it in the next life, the person, if they do not repent and atone for their sin and change their ways, they will spend eternity in hell. God don't play about these things. God loves you. Don't let Billy Carson make it seem like God is evil. God is as good as it can possibly get. There is no other God, no other being, no other religion, no other spirituality, no other philosophy, no other opinion, no other truth that can surpass the God of the Bible and who he is and how he is and his character and his goodness and his righteousness and his holiness and his love. No other religion is as safe for a woman as Christianity. Christianity is the reason. Look it up in history. The birth of Christianity is the reason why women have been treated more fairly over the last 2,000 years. The reason why women are seen as equals. The reason why we have women's rights. Christianity started that. The doctrines of the New Testament and what Christians lived off of for the last 2,000 years, and one of those doctrines that women were also made in the image of God and worthy of the same love and respect as men, and shall be treated as equals. And this has been preached for the last 2,000 years by the church and has reformed governments and has reformed societies. So the freedom and the treatment that you're receiving today is way better than back then. And it's the direct result of Christianity, this evil religion, this deceptive, manipulative, control religion that they talking about. We the reason. You see? Because our God cares for women. And he commands that we do the same. So I need y'all to really stop and think about what Billy Carson is saying. He's spewing out lies. This cannot be farther from the truth. I love y'all, and peace out.